Hey everyone, this is Chris with Nightrun Garage. Today we're going to show you our installation process on the Mk3 cluster with our TRD inspired gauges. Alright guys, so here is our TRD gauge cluster faces that we made for the Mk3 Supras. This is our first generation, version 1 if you will, of the TRD faces that we made. We pretty much replicated how the gauges were. We kept the indicators the same. These are modeled after an 89 Supra with no airbag light. They're modeled after an 89 turbo with voltmeter face. And what we did was we removed the kilometer an hour off the face. And again, it has no airbag light on it. So it's kind of a simplified version. It was a 160. And then what we did for the tack was we deleted everything off of it. The cruise control light, all the LEDs that were normally here on the bottom are deleted, and it goes to 10K, of course. Now keep in mind, mechanically, they stop at around 8500, so if you do want to actually have the functionality of 10K, there will be some modification that you would have to do to make that happen. But these are the first generation. These are a little grainy in texture. These are what we had produced. And if you don't know already, Stu Hagen is the guy that's making these gauges for us. We went to him because he made these available for the Mark IV community for years. The Mark III's never had this, and I had to actually bug him for about a year for this to happen. And what I wanted was an OE looking set of gauge faces that was never offered by TRD, but what would have been offered. So that's what we did with this set, and we came out with that. So what we did here is the version 2 is it's actually a matte finish. So it's more OE looking. And that's what we did with that. So, and we also extended, the other big thing we did was we expanded the mile an hour to 180. Now, this does delete the brake light down here. We thought about repositioning it to where the seatbelt warning light is, although we figured most guys probably don't care. And if you really want, you can actually put a red LED light in here so you can tell if the brake light's on, will light up the 180. But we can get into that further when we do the installation. So that's all the gauges. We also offer volt and boost. Either one you want is what we have to offer. And then mile an hour, obviously, was what I showed you already. Mile an hour, 180 mile an hour. And also a 300 kilometer an hour face. Now this is modeled off after a Euro 280, I believe it was. But we had to move the TRD up here compared to down there on the bottom. But this is offered for the Canadian and the Euro guys, and the right-hand drive market. However, this will take some modification to work in right-hand drive, but we wanted to kind of do a one-size-fits-all for everybody, although with the Mark IIIs it's very hard because there's probably about 100 variations with all the clusters between the years, turbo, engine, what continent they were on, etc. So these warning lights may not be specific to what is in your car. Again, these were modeled after the Euro set. So this was a rear fog light, and this is a general warning light. I believe they used e-brake and a few other things on there. So, but yeah, we kind of wanted to offer a little bit of everything for everybody. All right, so here is going to be the process of putting the faces in the actual cluster. We apologize, we didn't get a video of it pulling out of the car. We figure a lot of you guys have already done this a few times already. Many of you might have already done what we're doing right now of getting the glass off and the gauges apart, but we'll show everybody anyway how we do it, how we do the whole process, and then we'll go from there. All right, so in the front, you're gonna have 6 screws, Phillips head. And then you need to take the knob off the mileage reset button. And then you need to turn it over, and that's where most of the other screws are going to be. Again, all Phillips heads, if you've never done this. There are 4 you need to remove for the main cluster piece, and then you'll have to take the AC vents out as well. Alright, then you want to pop these AC vents out. You got to be careful with these because they have the plastic tabs that can break. This cluster seems like it's never been apart before. This is actually off our 86 project car, 86.5, that we're doing a 1JZ swap on. So then you're going to get the AC vents out. There are more Phillips underneath of here. And then you need to unplug the clock, and if you have a Supra monitor, also that as well. And then that will be it. So that's the glass off now. And here is the inner part. Forgot one important thing. The harness here that runs across the back, this is for the voltmeter, I believe. Now, if you have a car with a boost gauge, this is going to be a little bit different. If you have a JDM cluster, this is going to be a little different. They're all kind of a little different. This is for the voltmeter, like I said, or I believe it's for the security light. So that little harness will have to come off of there. Yeah, so that is for the security light. The TEMS also has some screws that would normally go about here. There's 4 of them for the harness for the TMS. You'll also want to remove that if you have that. So here's the cluster with that removed, all apart. So there's a couple different ways you can go about doing this. You can pull the needles off and put our faces on. You want to remove the factory faces with the screws and put our faces on and put the needles back on and use stock lighting, or you can use one of these bulbs. These are the SMD 194s. There's also number 74. You can get them in any color lighting that you want. They're available on eBay, Amazon, whatever. Pretty available. I've done this personally in my own car for years. It works good. However, the big problem with our faces, which something we can't replicate, is the light spreading pattern that Toyota would have used on the backside. So hot spots are going to be a problem that you're going to want to avoid. So that's the only issue, and this is why we use, instead of the bulbs, we use the strip lighting. Now, this is a cheap alternative route to going other than doing like SMD boards behind the faces. However, that can get expensive. It's difficult. This is like 10 bucks on Amazon, real cheap, easy. And if it ever goes bad, we hot glue them in. They go, you can replace them really easily. However, we haven't had any fail yet. And the way we wire them, it's through the factory dimmer circuit, so they dim with the factory dimmer. So that's the reason we do that, and we'll show you how to do that. You can either, like I said, you can use the factory lighting, factory bulbs, factory sockets, or you can do it our way, which makes it look really good, very vibrant. It lights up all the faces, it lights up all the areas. For the most part, it looks pretty good for how cheap it is. Again, if you want to go do your own thing with SMD boards, if you're really good at that kind of thing, I'm sure some of you are, that'd be really cool to do it that way. Totally not necessary, and again, it's totally not necessary to do it our way with the LED strip lighting. But we'll show you how to do it the way we do it. Should be fairly simple. I'll show you how to do it, and then we'll go from there. Alright, so this is probably the most critical part of this entire install, is the needle calibration. Now, this is something that's somewhat easy on a Mark IV. You can test the speedometer on a Mark IV on the bench. Mark IIIs, unless you have a converted speedometer, you have the cable driven, and there's no way to calibrate this accurately without doing it this way. So what we have to do, we'll show you how to get the needles where they have to sit, where they were, and put them back where they were, exactly where they were. So what we recommend is taking pictures with your phone, and it's also important that you need to have the cluster sitting as it would in the car. So what I do is I just take my phone camera and I take a picture of every face where it's sitting now, because if you don't, the needles can actually move if they're sitting flat, or if you have it upside down or whatever. it can actually move to a different position. That gas gauge is very important too, obviously, because you need to put it exactly where it was. For the most part, the other ones are zeroed out, which makes it a little easier. But I take pictures anyway. I mean, the more pictures you take, the better it's going to be, the easier it's going to be to track everything what you're doing. So the next step is pulling all you have to pull the needles off first, and then you have to pull all the gauges out to put the lighting around the perimeter of the cluster. So that's what we're going to do next. Another thing that we're not going to show you in the video is the needle paint. I've only figured this out on the 86.5 to 88 clusters. The paint sits on the top of the needle here, and then underneath it's on the back side. So what you can do is take brake cleaner or paint remover with a rag, and you can actually wipe this off very carefully, and I recommend using masking tape on the top of the needle. What you can do is wipe it off. Brake cleaner or acetone will take it off. You just got to be careful because it can degrade the plastic. And then you want to do that in the front and the back, and then you can paint it. Now, what I did was I used model paint. This was just the color red that I chose. I got this from Hobbytown. And then I used a very fine brush to paint it on. Also, again, masking tape. I'm being very careful. This is something we're going to do. We're just not going to show it in this video. This paint's actually about a year old, so we're just going to get some new paint and do that outside of the video. But we'll show you how to install it, exactly how we do it, and hopefully give you a good result that you're looking for. So, believe it or not, the best way to remove the needles is a kitchen fork. You can actually get underneath the needle and you pull it up. Now, these can be very stubborn. You got to be careful. Sometimes the gauges want to pull apart. Some of these are very fragile. I've had a couple oil pressure gauges, actually not through our process, but just seeing them age over the years. What drives the needle is actually a very, very small piece of nylon, and those can be broken on their own through temperature, age, whatever. So pulling these apart, you want to be very careful. You don't want to damage the gauge. You want to have them assembled first before when you pull them off, and then you want to do the faces. And again, most of these faces you can keep in the cluster if you're not doing anything with the bulbs. You can just pull the needles, pull the screws, and then pull the face off, and then swap the new faces on. If you're doing the lighting, these all have to come out actually of the cluster. It's fairly straightforward, so we'll go ahead and show that. So if you're using our faces, you can kind of use the old face as a sacrificial piece. However, you still have to be very careful not to damage the actual gauge, which is what I'm working around now. So there it is. There, it's the first needle's off. Now, if you already have a good set of cluster faces on, either ours or you have faces that you don't want to remove from the cluster, you want to be careful. It does mark them up a little bit with the fork. Again, we're just going to throw these in a box or something when we're done, so it's not really that important to save them. So for the gas gauge, I'm removing this first Phillips that holds the actual gauge itself on, just to get the fork better in there. And again, too, you want to kind of pull the needle off where it was sitting. I realize that's kind of difficult. This is kind of the most tedious process of all of this, just because you can severely damage the gauge if you're not careful. I'm going to go ahead and take these top Phillips out as well on these so I can get to the needle a little bit better. And you have to watch with these two because these actually are the ones that hold the face in as well. They hold the face together, I should say. So you want to be careful with these, how they come apart. They all come apart a little differently. So you just want to be careful with how you're removing all of these. So what you want to do next is pull the faces out of the actual cluster. And that's the coolant temp gauge coming out here now. There's 3 screws on the back of the cluster. Pulls that one out. The next is going to be the tack. And the tack is out. It's just those 5 screws. And then the speedometer is going to be these 4. Now, if you see here, if you see here, these smaller screws here do the power and grounding of some of the components on it, and these two are actually like the mounting points that hold the cluster into it. And then there's the speedometer out. Alright, next we're going to show you how to pull the gas gauge out. Again, it's going to be 3 screws. Now the other important thing, these copper rings kind of attach themselves to the screws if these have been together for a long time. You can actually see this one pulling up it actually pulls up this plastic that has the circuit board on it. So you just want to be careful not to break that. Just keep that in mind. Every washer is kind of pulling it up like that. So just be mindful of that. This stuff is pretty old by now. These are all, 30 something years old, just about. These are both just 2 screws, oil pressure and volt in this case. If you're switching to a voltmeter and you have a boosted car, original turbo car, there is a write-up how to do it. It's very simple. You just swap the gauge out and then you make a jumper wire. I believe it's one of these is blank on the turbo cluster, and you just run a jumper wire. I believe it's to one of these. If you Google it, you can find some old Superform stuff with the picture on there. And they are all out. So the next step is going to be the lighting, which is why all the complete gauges have to come out of the cluster. So what we do, again, I know I've said this a few times, so what we do here is we pull the factory bulbs out. It's these ones, all these green ones here. Pull all these out. What you actually do is you just snap them out, and that's it. And we just completely take the bulb out. Actually, you can leave the socket in if you want. Again, you can put these LED bulbs in these and use that. However, you're probably gonna have hot spots. Even with the OE clusters that have more of a light spreading pattern ability, you're still gonna have that. But with ours, don't have that, just because that technology is extremely expensive to do. You can actually see it here in the back of this cluster. But what these white or these clear panels actually do is spread the light a little bit. So if you just want to take that route and go this way, you can do that. It would be totally fine. We just think that this looks a little bit better if you do the ribbon. And here's the one actually for this cluster is going to be red LED ribbon that we got. So we'll be wiring this in. We'll show you how to do that. But again, if you want to do this, just remember these are one-way polarities. So LEDs are diodes, so they flow current in one direction. So that just keep in mind of that. Don't completely install your cluster without checking polarity first. So what you can do is just pull the bulbs out. Throw the bulbs out, and what you can do is, I use this hole to pass the wires through, and this is going to be where the wiring for this goes through to your factory wiring on your dash. The way we do it, we'll get to that a little later, but you wire the wiring back out through, and then there's 2 plugs on the Mk3 dash that control the lighting, and then you tap into those and you put a plug on it. And then what you do is that controls the lighting through the dimmer switch, so you can dim your LEDs. Otherwise, if you just do it to a 12 volt, like one of these for instance, if you go to just 12 volts and the ground on here, they're just going to be on all the time. Depending if they're probably not going to be controlled through the lighting switch, so they'll probably just be on all the time. Not the right way to do it. I just wouldn't recommend it because we try to have the most OEM look that we can go for. Alright, so here's our LED strip. What we do is these actually have one of those plugs where you can plug them into the wall through like a transformer, but we won't be using that. So that goes away. What you want to do here is you want to strip the ends. You strip the little sheathing off there. I used 10 gauge stripper lightly. I didn't hold it very tight, but that strips the ends. So you can do that. And the next step is to run it through your cluster. These do have adhesive backing on them, but obviously what I like to do is I like to use that and hot glue them just so they don't fall down over the vibrations of driving the car on the road. So what I do is put it through here, and then you can wire it into your dash. I'll show you that next. So these are a little different LED than we had been using. We've done it with red. We've done it with white. These are red. These are for one of our personal cars that we're doing it for. So you just got to run the lighting throughout the cluster, and like I said, we're going to hot glue these in place just so it's a little bit better, so it holds there. But again, you know, these are cheap LED lights. If they do burn out, you can replace them. They're not impossible to fix or replace down the road. This is why we put these in there somewhat temporarily, just in case they go bad. So the key here is you want as much light spreading to go on as you can. So you try to route it around the edges here below where these pegs are, where the gauges actually sit. You might have to play around with this a little bit to see where it lights it up, where it lights up the gauges. Like I said, there is a lot of creativity with this, where you put the lighting. And how it lights it up. If you have any dark spots, you might have to change it around. So we always test these before we completely finish the installation on them, so you can see where it's lighting up, where it's not. If it doesn't, see where it's going. Trust us, we know this isn't the most super high-tech way of doing it, but works pretty well considering. So if you look here, there's actually little scissor marks on these lights, and they tell you where to cut them. So that's where you can end it. You just gotta make sure you do it on that scissor mark, otherwise you're gonna have dead LEDs. right, so here it is. It's all glued in there. Low tech, but it does work. It's cheap enough for just about anybody, and you know, and it works pretty decent. And then there's the wires coming out the back. This is what we wired to the dash harness. What we'll do, and we'll show that a little bit, we're gonna probably extend these wires a little bit, and we're gonna put a Deutsch pin on here. You can use that if you have access to it. You can use GM type connectors or bullet connectors, butt connectors, whatever you want to do. Bullet connectors would probably be best if you don't have access to crimpers and stuff, because they are removable. That's what motorcycles use on turn signals and taillights and such, so that would probably be the best way if you don't have super high dollar crimpers or any Deutsch tools. That's what we recommend. But there it is, all installed, the LED lighting. We'll show you how to do the faces next. Alright, now here is probably the easier part of all of this, is taking the screws off the faces and installing the Nightrun faces on. So this does require removing the factory faces. And you just lay it on top of like that, and that's all it is. So another thing important worth noting, you don't want to over tighten these screws. If you do, you can actually see it on the gauge face. These are kind of more like wood style screws on the voltmeter and boost as well. So they actually screw into plastic, so they actually screw in pretty tight, but you can easily over tighten these. Just keep that in mind, because what you'll do is you'll see a little dimple around the screw. So that's the volt. You know, it looks, again, these this is a pre-89 face with all the dashes and with all the slots, and ours is an 89 style face. The only reason we really did all of them is so that they match. The coloring's different. The coloring's going to be more exact, matching across all of them. If you just did tack and speedo, which a lot of people had asked about, the coloring is just going to be different. So we avoid that by just doing all of them. So this one you want to be careful with the oil pressure. This is one of those more fragile ones. This is what I found broke on a few of them already, is this little piece of white plastic in here, where that actually drives the needle. You just want to be careful with that. And also this strap underneath here is threaded, and it's all separate pieces, so you kind of want to hold this together with your finger while you do this. And again, you want to kind of like sandwich this together with your fingers while you're doing it. And again, that threads through that to that like plate that's threaded on the back side. And that's also another reason you don't want to pull these completely out, with the gauge bolted into the cluster, because this plate will actually fall back into the cluster. So this is probably one of the, I believe this is the only one you're actually going to have to remove the gauge from the back side with these Phillips if you're just doing faces and no lighting. This is going to be one you're going to have to completely take out, and it's going to be the oil pressure again. And also you need to press around there's little pins here on the white. You just want to press in around that and get that pressed in correctly. Now this cluster doesn't have any extra LEDs coming through the faces. This is just a blank face with no LED strips. Now if they do, sometimes they will have like cruise control, different things, the ECT power button. For our faces, unless you come up with an intricate way to drill them out, you're going to have to snap those LEDs off the board. So just keep that in mind, that these are kind of like a minimalist cluster face. So you're gonna have to get rid of a lot of things. We don't have anything coming through ours. Again, I designed these around my personal car, with just simplest, just what you need kind of a thing. That's why we only have the mile an hour, no kilometers on here, is just to clean it up, give it a simple look, and there you go. So this is another big thing with these is it deletes the brake light. Now there is still a red screen, if you will, coming through. So this is still going to light up for the brake light, and seatbelt light of course too. So that's going to shine through, and it's going to light up the 180 in red. I don't know about the Canadian or kilometer clusters. Those may be different, but that's kind of the part of all this. It's hard to come up with a gauge face for every Mark III, just because of the variances. You know, it took a lot of convincing from everyone that was interested for us to even do kilometers, just again because of all the differences. I know there was quite a few. There was a 180 kilometer, there was a 240, a 260, and I believe a 280 as well, which was pretty rare. All right, so I got all the gauges in place on the board. One thing I forgot to mention is there is a box here from the factory that would have lit up a bulb, which I haven't seen on a Mark III in the US anyway. But there's a little box here that you have to cut out or Dremel out or whatever way you need to get out of the way to lay your light strip down here, and that's to avoid a dead spot around the 10K mark. Just so keep that in mind. That is something that you're going to want to do. Also, we're finding there is a dead spot for the lighting, and this is only going to apply at night for around the 180 mark. This is because this is where the brake light lies, and there is no backlighting in that area. A workaround for that problem would be to do what you do over here, but also then again you're gonna have no brake light whatsoever. Now again, that might not matter to a lot of you. You can do what you did here in the same spot, the same way that you did in this spot. You can do that. Again, you're just not going to have a brake light. Keep that in mind. You're going to want to take the bulb out of the cluster if you're going to do that, just so it doesn't light up your cluster with kind of a, because these are standard bulbs, so it'll be more of a yellow light. So you're just going to want to take that out if you're going to go about that way. You certainly can, you know, if you do cut out that area, that will eliminate that problem with the backlighting around the 180. But again, just at your own discretion, you won't have a brake light. For any of you who have state inspections or you need to have it to get on track, whatever, just keep that in mind. That won't be there if you go that route. But we did it over here around the 10K mark. I know it's not a glamorous, but again, this isn't stuff you're going to see or ever will see, and not really going to matter if you kind of cut it out or Dremel it or grind it out, a belt sand or whatever, you know, to get this box gone that would have lit up a warning light of some type. Alright, so here's the plug I was talking about earlier, for those of you that aren't familiar. This is called a Deutsch connector. They sell them a lot of places online. These are really great connectors. They're weather tight. They're OE quality. We use them a lot in the shop. This is a Deutsch DTM. These are the smallest style they make. Lower amperage stuff, which is what these clusters will be for, just powering these LED lights. And what the idea is here is we put this onto a plug, so then whenever you do remove or install your cluster, you can disconnect it here. Quick disconnect. You're not going to break it. If you do a butt connector or anything else like that, you're not going to be able to disconnect it every time you take the dash out. You're going to have to cut the wires and resplice them. Same with soldering. You want to avoid that. You want to use something like a connector. You can use GM connectors, whatever, 2-pin connector. We just use the Deutsch, is what we have here. They're very universal. You know, we have suppliers for them. And then what you would do here is I left leads here to power this on to show you what it's going to look like. But what these are going to go to is we're going to connect these into our dash harness, and we'll show you that too, which wires to connect to and how to find it with a meter. And these are going to connect to your dash lights, so you will have these go directly to your chassis. So this plug will take over your dash lights. Again, this is the way we found to do it. That makes most sense to us. So you can retain the dimmer switch. You could do that if you somehow powered into here. This is power and ground here. All these light sockets, you could use those. The only reason we didn't is because you would have to solder onto this, something just I haven't done. That would avoid having to do plugs and all that. But if you found a way to get into this, or you can solder into this socket somehow, honestly, I haven't really looked into it that far, because this method works. It's super easy, 2 wires. So we just been doing it that way, but not to say you can't do it another way. But I'm sure that would get you the same result. But here they are. Obviously installation is exact opposite of removal. You just install the faces back on and you just pop the needles on. And calibration is going to be a big part of this, and this is why it's difficult for us to offer this as a service. because these needles have to go on exactly how they came off. And if you actually watch, you can see the coolant needle actually, if you move it, the needle actually moves. So this is why it's important to calibrate the gauges as they sit like this in the car. You can do it on the bench. Coolant's a little difficult to get it right. Tach and speedometer, pretty much you set to 0 where it was. They're not like, on the Mark IIIs are kind of funny because they're not exactly at 0, which is kind of weird. They're usually like a little below it, is what I've noticed. Fuel gauge, obviously, too, that's a real tricky one to set, because when you move the needle to get it centered on there, you move it around a little bit. So really, that's why it's important to take pictures of where exactly your gas gauge was before, and then that way when you turn the key back on, it'll go back to where it was. So that's what you want. You want to avoid having your gas gauge off, obviously. And also, these are pretty simple too. Oil and volt, same goes for boost. These you pretty much zero out. They kind of just go to 0. So if you put them at 0, then they're zeroed back out. Speedometer is definitely going to be the trickiest. And again, this is why this is hard for us to offer this as a service. Speedometer, you want to zero it out. That's going to get you a pretty good baseline of where you're at. But really the only way we found to do it is you install this back on, obviously. You put everything back on the cluster like you would, except for the glass. You don't put the glass on. So you're going to put the cluster in the car, you're going to plug it all in, and you're going to drive the car, and you're going to have to use GPS to see how far it's off. I recommend doing this, as safely as you can. Be careful. Don't do this in the middle of traffic or anything. I mean, you're going to have to get off the road somewhere, either go back to your house or your shop, whatever, and make sure this, if the gauge is off, you're going to have to move it. That's why Mark IIIs are real tricky. Mark IVs you can test on the bench. Mark IIIs, not so much. So just be careful of that. We don't recommend going out on road if you don't have to, or, a public highway, but I mean, it's just very tricky to get these. That's why you just want to put these exactly back where they were. They, in theory, should line up where they were. Obviously, too, if you have a pre-89 car, these are 89 style gauges. They are a little different. We did just extend the 160 to the 180, so we didn't want to move this point. There have been some other gauges on the market that have moved the 180 up to where the 160 is, and it kind of scrunched everything, and everything's a little off. So we wanted to avoid that by just extending it, but we run into this problem where it doesn't light it up completely at night unless you go in and modify the cluster a little bit more, which I guess to a lot of you it's not the end of the world. But there it is. There it is installed, and these are the Deutsch pins I was talking about. This is the 2-pin style, DTM they're called. These are really great, and they have the connector, the lock, and then the pins. And then the female pin, or the female connectors have the male pins, and then the male connector has the female pins, just so you see that. But you can crimp these with a pretty standard crimper. You don't need a Deutsch tool. There are Deutsch connectors that have it's a full barrel that crimps it. But there are $200-300 crimpers for those, but otherwise with these you can crimp. They work pretty great. You don't have to use these. It's just what we use, what we have, what we use on customer stuff. So it's just how we do it. Again, a bullet connector, if you guys are familiar with motorcycle lights, that may be the way to do it, simply and cheaply. These are a little bit expensive for what they are, but so that might be the way to do it with that. Alright, so now I'm going to show you what to do to find the 2 wires that are going to control your dimmer switch for your dash light. So when you get the dash out, you're going to have all these plugs here, obviously. And now, I apologize, I can't remember directly off the top of my head, and the light switch in this car is broken, so I can't test it to show you. But I'll show you exactly what to do. So it should be these 2 plugs here, and when you're looking at them from, there's a left-hand drive car. When you're looking at them, it should be this left pin on the far left and this pin all the way here on the blue. Both left sides. Well, the easiest way you can do to test that is obviously what you want to do is get a meter if you don't have one. Put it DC. And what you can do is you can turn your light switch on. Sorry for the terrible filming. What you can do is put your meter on those pins, the far left, And then what you're gonna do is you're gonna turn the lights on. You'll get the representation here. I got 2 hands to work with. So you put these here, turn your lights on, and then what you do is you play with your dimmer switch, you turn it up and down, and then you watch your voltage. And your voltage should go from, I believe, 4 or 5 volts to 12. So that's how the easiest way you can tell which pins. Like I said before, I've done a couple of these, and it's usually these 2 pins on the left side of these connectors. What you want to do is cut the wire. You're going to want to cut the wire evenly, probably around this point here. You're going to want to cut both wires, and what you do is you're going to put your connector or your butt connector of whichever type you're using, Deutsch connector, GM, whatever, around this point. So you're going to cut the wire, cut them both around here, slip them out of the tape, and put your connector here, and you'll have enough slack between both of them to solder. What you want to do is you solder in or crimp or butt connector, whatever, onto this, and then have your lead coming out for your 2-pin connector. And that'll be the easiest way to do it. Again, if you have a meter, finding this thing is real quick and easy. I'm telling you that just because if there's a difference between the pre-89s, post-89s, the 92s, maybe they shouldn't be, but just in case. Because I know all the clusters are the same, they interchange. So like I said, should be those 2 wires, and there you go. You pin it in, and you should be good to go. There's your dash lights, and your dimmer switch works. You can dim down your lights, because sometimes with these LEDs, they're pretty bright, especially at night. The white LEDs in my car, especially when there's nothing else on the road, they are pretty bright. Just like the Stu Hagen gauges are in the Mark IVs. His are very, very bright, actually. His are way brighter than ours are, but that's definitely going to be the easiest way to do it. So there it is. Alright, so now I'm going to show you the lighting, just as an example of what it looks like. Now, again, we did these in red. We'll show you what they look like when they're with white LEDs, which is what we typically do. I'm just using a power probe to power this up from my jump box. But let me turn the lights off real quick, and I'll show you what that looks like. So this is what it's going to look like. I'm not sure what it shows up like on camera, but this is the lighting, the LED lighting. It's fairly even across the board. Again, this is red, so this looks a little different than what we typically do. But like I said here, the 180 doesn't show up because it's inside of that brake light box. But everything else, it's fairly even across the board, as much as you can get anyway with what we have. Again, PCB boards would be the best way to do this, but we don't typically build those. That's not something we do a lot of. So this would pretty much be the way to do it on the cheap, on the easy. Pretty much anybody can do this. So this is how we do it, how we recommend doing it. But there it is. That's red LEDs. We'll show you what white looks like, which are typical. And then we're also going to paint the needles red. So we're not going to completely stick this cluster back together 100%. We're also going to paint the needles and put them back on after that, and we'll go back in the car after it's calibrated and everything. To go over one other thing with what we do with the clusters, I've built a couple for customers so far, including my own car. We've done these a few times now. So what I typically do is everything I've showed you, put the LEDs in it, paint the needles. Again, the 89, I don't know if I just explained this earlier, the 89 and 92 needles are actually different. The paint on here is all on top, but the 89 is underneath the center part here, if that makes any sense. And you can't really access it. There may be a way to do it, and also if you do paint the needles, they don't light up. They do make light rings and all sorts of different things, although, you know, again, we're not in the business of building clusters. I know there's some guys out there that do, but we really are just selling the gauge faces and showing you how we did it, an easier way that we did it. But really, we're just applying the faces. However you do everything else, it's entirely up to you. A lot of the Mark III community is DIY, so that's why we kind of just offered it, you know, almost as a blank slate. You can just go simply and put them in, or you can go crazy and do all these LED lights and do these cool mods that a lot of these guys are doing. So it's cool to see the different stuff they're doing. All right, so next we're going to show you, this is another final step, again, totally optional, but you can usually see, you know, how these show up, how they look. I don't know how it shows up in video, but how they typically look over the years. They get yellowed and dirty and kind of, you know, you can hear how it's kind of just rough on the surface. So we usually polish these. We will be doing that. We're just not going to show it in this video, but you know, it's just got dirt and, you know, crud all over it from the years. But these aren't available new anymore, unfortunately. They were a couple years ago, but you know, thanks to Toyota, they're not. So what we're gonna do is I'll show you how to polish this, what we use and how we do it. So it's fairly simple. Usually the backside you don't have to get crazy on, you can just clean it. The front side usually what's scratched up from people cleaning over the years. Every time the car was sold, I'm sure, at the dealerships or used car lots, they got wiped down with a paper towel, whatever. Every time it scratches them pretty bad. So what we use is this. It's called Novus. It's a 3-part system. You get it on Amazon, I believe has it. Stuff's really good. It's really good for taillights too. Soft plastics. So what we do is you just clean it really good. You want to clean it with like Windex or whatever. Wipe it down with a clean microfiber. And then you're going to do step 1 or step 3, which is the first step, with a kind of a rougher pad. They sell these 3M pads usually like body shops or automotive stores. Again, it's probably not crazy important what you use. I just use it on a buffer on a low speed, and you know, you kind of just buff on number 3, and then you switch to number 2, and you use a fine foam pad. Same deal. You don't want to go crazy high speed. And you clean it, and then you wipe it down real good, and then you spray it with this. On both front and back. Again, you probably don't want to use this stuff, these two on the back. Usually the backs are fine as far as the polishing goes, but you want to use this to clean it at the very end. And I've had really good luck with it. It's not going to show up on camera, you know, how bad this one is, but I've had good luck doing it on other ones, and I've got pretty bad ones looking all right. So that's what we do, and then that's the final step, and then you just put this back together in the reverse order. Put this back on your cluster, then reinstall it. But again, just make sure your needles are calibrated first, and then you put this on. I know it's kind of a pain. That's kind of why it's hard to offer this service. So hopefully this kind of showed you how to do it. How to get your lights in there, the LED lights. If you have any other questions, just let us know. You can shoot us email, nightrungarage@gmail.com, for any technical questions. There's also a contact form through our website, nightrungarage.com. If you have any problems or questions installing these, just give us a call, give us an email. Hopefully we can help you out and get these in there and looking good in your car. All right, thanks. Hey everyone, how's it going?